When the Sony ZV E1 first came out, I was certain that it would be way more popular. But it seems that it's landed itself as one of the most hated cameras of 2023. Maybe for good reason, but maybe not. Let's look at all sides of the argument to see if this is the right camera for you. The ZV E1 performs extremely well when it comes to video quality and even rivals some of Sony's best cinema line cameras like the FX3. It can record in 4K in 24, 30, 60, and 120 frames per second, all in 422 10-bit color, which is incredible. And that 4K 120 only has a 10% crop, which is impressive. You've been looking at the video quality this whole time, and this entire video, besides the shots of the actual camera, are gonna be recorded using the Sony ZV E1. We're getting outstanding in-camera stabilization with Sony's dynamic active steady shot. It works really well for anything handheld and might even replace a gimbal for some use cases. It does come with a 30% crop, which for example will make my 17mm lens more like a 22mm lens. And this is a noticeable crop when using it for what I like to use this feature for a lot, which is a vlog style shot. You're also getting other stabilization options which are gonna stabilize a little bit less but have little to no crop. And they're still really good. The ZV E1 is also coming equipped with Sony's new AI chip, which offers two really important features. The first one being AI-based autofocus, and this camera simply doesn't miss. I have 100% confidence in the autofocus as a solo shooter. Quick tip though, and I unfortunately learned this one the hard way. The product showcase feature is great for its intended use of disabling the eye autofocus when a product is held up in front of your face. But if you aren't doing that, make sure you turn the product showcase feature off because the camera might misfocus. With that AI chip, we're also getting the auto framing. This is typically something I used to do in post, but having it in camera has been one of those features that I didn't really know I needed until I had access to it. What it's doing is it's just cropping in on the sensor and tracking the subject around, making it look as though somebody's filming you, which can be a really nice secondary shot. The ZV E1 is going to perform extremely well in low light situations. This is due to it sharing that same sensor as the FX3 and the A7S III, which are known for solid low light performance. One reason why it does so well is it has this dual native ISO, which essentially means that we're able to get low noise out of really high ISOs because at a certain point, depending on the picture profile, at a certain point, the noise levels are going to reset as we're cranking up the ISO. If you want your own quick guide for all those dual native baseline ISOs for all the picture profiles in the ZV E1, check the link out down below. There's a free guide there for you. I have a lot more to say when it comes to maximizing the low light with this camera, and more on that towards the end of this video. A big strength of this camera is its size. It also could be a downside, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I find it to be a big strength with how compact this camera is and the video quality that we can get in such a small form factor. Because of that small form factor, this camera is incredibly easy to pack, and it's kind of just always with me. This camera is also incredibly easy to use, especially compared to something like the FX3, which when you first take that out and look at it, might be a little bit intimidating for the beginner, but I've recommended this camera to plenty of beginners and had fantastic feedback about how quick they're able to pick it up and get really good shots. I don't know what Sony did with the color science in this camera, but it's outstanding. I shot a lot with the A7 IV prior to getting the ZV E1 and noticed something really quickly about how accurate the colors were in the ZV E1 in contrast to previous Sony cameras, which weren't bad with their color science. I think that reputation over time has gotten a lot better. It used to be this crazy green tint all the time. But when I took the ZV E1 out of the box and got my first shots with it, I noticed the skin tones in particular looked really good without much tweaking in post. We're also getting really strong battery life performance with the ZV E1, and that's due to the Sony FZ battery, which is nice to see that huge battery with tons of battery life fitting into this tiny camera. It's also a full frame sensor, which does bring the cost up a little bit, but also makes it an extremely strong performer in things like low light, and just generally having a full frame camera can be some nice benefits to the video quality. And the hot shoe on this camera is the new digital hot shoe interface, which allows us to use Sony's new microphones and get 4-channel safety track recording and not having to use a cable to connect our microphone to our camera. Seems like a small thing, but since I've got the new Sony microphones, not having to use cables is actually a nice benefit. We're also getting a fully articulating touchscreen, which for newer Sony cameras is kind of a staple. And with that fully articulating touchscreen, we're also getting the ability, and this is new to the ZV E1, the ability to actually change settings via the touch menu, like ISO or your aperture or your white balance, which is really nice, particularly when you're doing a vlog style shot and you don't have access to the back of the camera. We can also install our own custom user LUTs into this camera. This allows us to see our footage, what it's gonna look like when we have our LUT applied, which is typically something we had to wait to see in post, so it's nice to be able to see that preview prior to even hitting record. If you wanna see more videos like this one, let me know by giving this video a tap on the thumbs up. And while you're down there, let me know in the comments why you either picked up the ZV E1 or you're thinking about picking it up. I'd be really curious to know. And as strong as this camera is for all the reasons we just talked about, it also does have a few downfalls and some reasons as to why it might be hated. Let's take a look at those. The first thing that jumps out is the price. It's $2,200. In just a minute, I'm gonna give my ultimate verdict as well as who this camera's for. I'm gonna dive into that pricing factor, so stay tuned. Overheating is a really common reason why this camera is getting a bad rap, but I think that's blown a little bit out of proportion. I've had no problem filming in 4K 24 with this camera well over 50 minutes and close to an hour before getting any overheating warnings in a controlled environment where it's not too hot, like 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a really long recording, and it's not too often that we're recording for that long anyways. But I think what really happened here is people hear that it does overheat, and so that gets kind of blown way out of proportion and saying it overheats, I'm not gonna get it. But when you look at that practically, you're getting a lot of record time in 4K 24 and 422 10-bit with the ridiculous video quality and a tiny form factor. And I think that's pretty impressive overall. With that being said, if I was a professional wedding videographer and I was out in the sun all the time, I wouldn't be using this camera professionally for that reason anyways. But for the majority of us, the overheating is not gonna be an issue. So if you've heard that it overheats and you've written it off because of that, I would strongly reconsider that. The form factor can be a negative here. As many benefits as it has that we already talked about, I can see the point of saying, well, I can't take it on a professional shoot with such a small form factor. People won't take me seriously. I can see that, but I also don't think you're taking a ZV E1 on an ultra professional shoot. So I don't really see that form factor as being a huge negative. I will say the grip is pretty weak. I prefer a camera like the A6700 that has a bit more of a beefy grip to it. One thing you can do to help out with the grip on the ZV E1 though, Small Rig makes this base plate that's like $29 and it adds some depth to it, so you can get your pinky to fit on the camera, and it also is gonna be an Arca Swiss style plate, so you don't have to have any additional plates on it. You can connect it to your tripods or your gimbals. It only has one SD card slot, which is a good argument to hate this camera. $2,200, one SD card slot. I get it. If you're filming once in a lifetime things, you probably want 2 SD cards just to make sure you're safe in case one fails. Having said that, I've never had any issues with modern Sony cameras having any SD card failure. I do think the technology is getting really good, and making sure you're using high quality SD cards in this situation. Like, I like the Sony Tough cards a lot. The Pro grades are also really nice, but using quality SD cards is gonna make sure that you're not gonna have any high risk of your SD cards failing. It does lack in some photo capabilities. Two things really come to mind here. The first one is that it only has an electronic shutter. So there's no mechanical shutter on this camera, which I don't love. It also only has 12 megapixels for photos. But on that note, you don't really hear any complaints about the FX3, which is the same 12 megapixel sensor. You don't really hear about the FX3 having no really good photo capabilities. I think that's because it's targeted as a cinema line camera. But we did used to hear a lot about the A7S III, which the A7S III, FX3, and ZV E1 all share that same 12 megapixel sensor. We used to hear all the time that the A7S III doesn't have enough megapixels for photos. I think that's mostly because of the form factor. A7S III has a viewfinder on top of the camera, just like the A7R series or the A7 series, which are typically really good with photos. I think the same thing's going on here with the ZV line. This camera's predecessor, the ZV E10, had a 24.2 megapixel sensor for photos, and it was really good at video and photo. So then with the ZV E1 coming out, it's a lot more geared toward video as opposed to being good at both video and photo. And because it has that ZV tag, I think that's where some of the letdown has occurred. And although the ZV E1 is not my main camera for photography, but I could absolutely use it for things like thumbnails or other just general photography. It has a micro HDMI port, which, yeah, I'll level with you, like those suck. But because they break. But if you're not using this camera with an external monitor, which I get it. If it's a video-centric camera, you're probably using it with an external monitor like I am right now. But if you're not using external monitors, the micro HDMI is a non-issue. Let's tie this all together with my verdict and who this camera is for and why it's hated and why I think it should be way more popular. The ZV line has produced some really good affordable cameras, like the ZV E10, which was also targeted, like this one is, toward content creators. They're also at a really affordable rate. The price tag on it for around like $700 was also in that entry level category. So with the ZV E1, I think that people's expectation is that it's a beginner camera because it's that ZV line, but the price point might be too high as an entry level camera. And I get it, that $2,200 price tag is a lot of money. But if you strip the ZV from the name of this camera, the features that you get, the video quality in a small form factor with a very user-friendly interface, and call it something like the FX3C, the C for compact, or like an FX3B, B for beginner. I really think that this camera becomes a lot more popular and the price point is a lot more accepted. So who's it for? I think serious content creators, serious YouTubers. The quality and feature set that you're getting out of this camera easily make it, I'd say, like a 3 to 5 year camera, maybe even longer if you're not getting a little bit of FOMO from new stuff that's coming out. It's gonna be solid for a long period of time. I think it actually fits really well for somebody who's just starting out and is planning on doing this for a long time and wants really good features and really good quality on day one with how good this camera is with the AI and all the auto features, but wants to grow into some more pro level features because this camera is going to support those too. I do think the Sony ZV E1 should be way more popular, and it's one of my favorite cameras in my kit, which my kit does have some stiff competition. It might be time to do a what's in my camera bag 2023. Anyways, all the subscribers to this channel are incredibly talented and attractive people, just like you, and I'd love to have you a part of what we've got going on here. And if you happen to have a ZV E1, you're thinking about picking it up, and you want to get the best low light performance possible, you want to check out this video where I dive into exactly how to do that. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care. See ya.